Distinguished viewers, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. I am here to report that spooky season is finally upon us. It's my favorite season. So naturally, I went to my local TK Maxx, or TJ Maxx as you guys probably know it, only to look for fall candles, because I love candles. I love the sense of cinnamon spice and white pumpkin. But little did I know that I would get stuck in the book section once again. I bought a book. It's classic ghost stories by a lot of different classic authors like Charles Dickens and Arthur Conan Doyle. And I thought, now that spooky season is upon us, maybe I can read you some ghost stories. The back says, "Do you believe in ghosts?" As the winter nights draw in and the cozy fire casts curious shadows about the room, you may find yourself dwelling on those unexplained frights, flickers in the corner of your eye, a half-remembered figure at the end of your bed. Ghosts, spirits, specters, or spooks. We have always felt the presence of someone or something hovering in the darkest corners of our imaginations. Gathered in this spine-tingling collection are some of the most iconic Victorian ghost stories, from Charles Dickens's The Signalman to M.R. James's A Warning to the Curious, alongside more unexpected contributions from masters of the form such as J.S. Le Fanu and H.G. Wells. You may think you don't believe in ghosts, but these stories will haunt you nonetheless. Ooh, that sounds nice. I love horror, and I love dark stories and vampire stuff. Just anything with a dark vibe and a macabre topic. Love it. Also, I've just seen that there's the price tag still on, so let's get it off. By the way, I just painted my nails yesterday, and look. Why? I barely touched anything, but yeah. No. Okay, I got it. I got it for €9, ladies and gentlemen. Yep. Anyways, let's start with the first story. I think I will actually start with the first one. The Signalman by Charles Dickens. Oh, so before any story, there's a little introduction to the author and his life, I guess. That's cool. Okay, so is that the Signalman? Yeah. Just checking how long it is. raining right now. So if you hear any raindrops on the window pane, there's a window pane right behind you. I thought that would add to the cozy feeling. Okay, let's start the Signalman. Hello, below there. When he heard a voice thus calling to him, he was standing on the door of his box, with a flag in his hand, furled round its short pole. One would have thought, considering the nature of the ground, that he could not have doubted from what quarter the voice came, but instead of looking to where I stood on the top of the steep cutting nearly over his head, he turned himself about and looked down the line. There was something remarkable in his manner of doing so, though I could not have said for my life what. But I know it was remarkable enough to attract my notice, even though his figure was foreshortened and shadowed down in the deep trench, and mine was high above him, so steeped in the glow of an angry sunset that I had shaded my eyes with my hand before I saw him at all. Helloa, below! From looking down the line, he turned himself about again, and raising his eyes, saw my figure high above him. Is there any path by which I can come down and speak to you? He looked up at me without replying, and I looked down at him without pressing him too soon with a repetition of my idle question. Just then there came a vague vibration in the earth and air, quickly changing into a violent pulsation and an oncoming rush that caused me to start back, as though it had forced to draw me down. When such vapor as rose to my height from a rapid train had passed me and was skimming away over the landscape, I looked down again and saw him refurling the flag he had shown while the train went by. I repeated my inquiry. After a pause, during which he seemed to regard me with fixed attention, he motioned with his rolled-up flag towards a point on my level, some 200 or 300 yards distant. I called down to him, "All right," and made for that point. There, by dint of looking closely about me, I found a rough zigzag descending path notched out, which I followed. The cutting was extremely deep and unusually precipitate. It was made through a clammy stone that became oozier and wetter as I went down. For these reasons, I found the way long enough to give me time to recall a singular air of reluctance or compulsion with which he had pointed out the path. When I came down low enough upon the zigzag descent to see him again, I saw that he was standing between the rails of the way by which the train had lately passed, in an attitude as if he were waiting for me to appear. He had his left hand at his chin, and that left elbow rested on his right hand, crossed over his breast. His attitude was one of such expectation and watchfulness that I stopped a moment, wondering at it. I resumed my downward way and stepped out upon the level on the railroad, and drawing nearer to him, saw that he was a dark, sallow man with a dark beard and rather heavy eyebrows. His post was in as solitary and dismal a place as ever I saw. On either side, a dripping wet wall of jagged stone, excluding all view but a strip of sky. The perspective, one way only, a crooked prolongation of his great dungeon. The shorter perspective in the other direction terminating in a gloomy red light, and the gloomier entrance to a back tunnel, in whose massive architecture there was a barbarous, depressing and forbidding air. So little sunlight ever found its way to the spot that it had an earthy, deadly smell, and so much cold wind his life, and who, being at last set free, had a newly awakened interest in these great works. To such purpose I spoke to him, but I am far from sure of the terms I used, for besides that I am not heavy in opening any conversation, there was something in the man that daunted me. He directed a most curious look towards the red light near the tunnel's mouth and looked all about it, as if something were missing from it, and then looking at me. That light was part of his charge, was it not? He answered in a low voice, "Don't you know it is?" The monstrous thought came into my mind as I perused the fixed eyes and the saturnine face. Saturnine, I don't know. That this was a spirit, not a man. I have speculated since whether there may have been infection in his mind. In my turn, I stepped back, but in making the action, I detected in his eyes some latent fear of me. This put the monstrous thought to flight. "You look at me," I said, forcing a smile, "as if you had a dread of me." I was doubtful, he returned, whether I had seen you before. "Where?" He pointed to the red light he had looked at. "There," I said. Intently watchful of me, he replied, but without sound. "Yes." "My good fellow, what should I do there? However, be that as it may, I never was there, you may swear." That rhymes. "I think I may," he rejoined. "Yes, I am sure I may." His manner cleared, like my own. He replied to my remarks with readiness and in well-chosen words. Had he much to do there? Yes. But exactness and watchfulness were what was required of him, and of actual work, manual labor, he had next to none. To change that signal, to trim those lights, and to turn this iron handle now and then, was all he had to do under that head. Regarding those many long and lonely hours of which I seemed to make so much, he could only say that the routine of his life had shaped itself into that form, and he had grown used to it. He had taught himself a language down there, if only to know it by sight, and to have formed his own crude ideas of its pronunciation could be called learning it. He had also worked at fractions and decimals and tried a little algebra, but he was and had been as a boy a poor hand at figures. Was it necessary for him, when on duty, always to remain in that channel of damp air, and could he never rise into the sunshine between those high stone walls? Why, that depended upon times and circumstances. Under some conditions there would be less upon the line than under others, and the same held good as to certain hours of the day and night. In bright weather he did choose occasions for getting a little above those lower shadows, but being at all times liable to be called by his electric bell, and at such times listening for it with redoubled anxiety, the relief was less than I would suppose. He took me into his box, where there was a fire, a desk for an official book in which he had to make certain entries, a telegraphic instrument with its dial, face and needles, and the little bell of which he had spoken. On my trusting that he would excuse the remark that he had been well educated, and, I hoped I might say without offence, perhaps educated above that station, he observed that instances of slight incongruity in such wise would rarely be found wanting among large bodies of men, that he had heard it was so in workhouses, in the police force, even in that last desperate resource, the army, and that he knew it was so, more or less, in any great railway staff. He had been, when young, if I could believe it, sitting in that hut, he scarcely could, a student of natural philosophy, and had attended lectures, but he had run wild, misused, was far too late to make another. All that I had here condensed, he said in a quiet manner, with his grave dark regards divided between me and the fire. He threw in the word sir from time to time, and especially when he referred to his youth, as though to request me to understand that he claimed to be nothing but what I found him. He was several times interrupted by the little bell, and I had to read off messages and send replies. Once he had to stand without the door and display a flag as a train passed and make some verbal communication to the driver. In the discharge of his duties, I observed him to be remarkably exact and vigilant, breaking off his discourse at a syllable and remaining silent until what he had to do was done. In a word, I should have set this man down as one of the safest men to be employed in that capacity, but for the circumstance that while he was speaking to me, he twice broke off with a fallen colour, turned his face towards the little bell when it did not ring, opened the door of the hut, which was kept shut to exclude the unhealthy damp, and looked out towards the red light near the mouth of the tunnel. On both of these occasions he came back to the fire with the inexplicable air upon him which I had remarked, without being able to define when you were so far asunder. Said I when I rose to leave him, "You almost make me think that I have met with a contented man." I am afraid I must acknowledge that I said it to lead him on. "I believe I used to be so," he rejoined, in the low voice in which he had first spoken. "But I am troubled, sir, I am troubled." He would have recalled the words if he could. He had said them, however, and I took them up quickly. "With what? What is your trouble?" "It is very difficult to impart, sir. It is very, very difficult to speak of. If ever you make me another visit, I will try to tell you. But I expressly intend to make you another visit. Say, when shall it be?" "I go off early in the morning, and I shall be on again at 10 tomorrow night, sir. I will come at 11. He thanked me and went out at the door with me. "I'll show you my white light, sir," he said, in his peculiar low voice, "till you have found the way up. When you have found it, don't call out, and when you are at the top, don't call out." His manner seemed to make the place strike colder to me, but I said no more than, "Very well." "And when you come down tomorrow night, don't call out. Let me ask you a parting question. What made you cry? Halloa, below there, tonight?" "Heaven knows," said I. "I cried something to that effect." "Not to that effect, sir. Those were the very words. I know them well." "I admit those were the very words. I said them, no doubt, because I saw you below. For no other reason." "What other reason could I possibly have?" "You had no feeling that they were conveyed to you in any supernatural way?" "No." "He wished me good night and held up his light." Another rhyme. "I walked by the side of the down line of rails, which a very disagreeable sensation of a train coming behind me, until I found the path. It was easier to mount than to descend, and I got back to my inn without any adventure. Punctual to my appointment, I placed my foot on the first notch of the zigzag next night, as the distant clocks were striking 11. He was waiting for me at the bottom, with his white light on. "I have not called out," I said, when we came close together. "May I speak now?" "By all means, sir." "Good night, then, and here's my hand." "Good night, sir, and here's mine." With that we walked side by side to his box, entered it, closed the door, and sat down by the fire. "I have made up my mind, sir," he said, bending forward as soon as we were seated, and speaking in a tone but a little above a whisper, "that you shall not have to ask me twice what troubles me. I took you for someone else yesterday evening. That troubles me." "That mistake?" "No, that's someone else." direction of an arm, gesticulating with the utmost passion and vehemence. For God's sake, clear the way. One moonlight night, said the man. I was sitting there when I heard a voice cry, "Aloha below there." I started up, looked from the door and saw there's someone else standing by the red light near the tunnel, waving as I just now showed you. The voice seemed hoarse with shouting, and it cried, "Look out, look out." And then again, "Aloha below there, look out." I caught up my lamp, turned it on red and ran towards the figure, calling, "What's wrong? What has happened? Where?" I stood just outside the blackness of the tunnel. I advanced so close upon it that I wondered at its keeping the sleeve across its eyes. I ran right upon it, and had my hand stretched out to pull the sleeve away, when it was gone. "Into the tunnel," said I. No, I ran on into the tunnel, 500 yards. I stopped and held my lamp above my head, and saw the figures of the measured distance, and saw the wet stains stealing down the walls and trickling through the arch. I ran out again faster than I had run in, for I had a mortal abhorrence of the place upon me. And I looked all around the red light with my own red light, and I went up the iron ladder to the gallery atop of it, and I came down again and ran back here. I telegraphed both ways. An alarm has been given. Is anything wrong? The answer came back both ways. All well. Resisting the slow touch of a frozen finger tracing out my spine, I showed him how that this figure must be a deception of his sense of sight, and how that figures originating in disease of the delicate nerves that minister to the functions of the eye were known to have often troubled patients, some of whom had become conscious of the nature of their affliction, and had even proved it by experiments upon themselves. As to an imaginary cry, I said, do but listen for a moment to the wind in this unnatural valley, why we speak so low, and to the wild harp it makes of the telegraph wires. That was all very well, he returned, after we had sat listening for a while, and he ought to know something of the wind and the wires, he who so often passed long winter nights down here, alone and watching, but he would beg to remark that he had not finished. I asked his pardon, and he slowly added these words, touching my arm. Within 6 hours of the appearance, the memorable accident on this line happened, and within 10 hours the dead and wounded were brought along through the tunnel over the spot where the figure had stood. A disagreeable shudder crept over me, but I did my best against it. It was not to be denied, I rejoined, that this was a remarkable coincidence, calculated deeply to impress his mind. But it was unquestionable that remarkable coincidences did continually occur, and they must be taken into account in dealing with such a subject. Though to be sure, I must admit, I added, for I thought I saw that he was going to bring the objection to bear upon me, men of common sense did not allow much for coincidences in making the ordinary calculations of life. He again begged to remark that he had not finished. I again begged his pardon for being betrayed into interruptions. This, he said, again laying his hand upon my arm and glancing over his shoulder with hollow eyes, was just a year ago. 6 or 7 months passed, and I had recovered from the surprise and shock when one morning, as the day was breaking, I mouth was very dry. Mine is dry as well. Let's drink the last bit of tea. Delicious. The wind in the wires took up the story with a long lamenting wail. He resumed. Now, sir, mark this, and judge how my mind is troubled. The spectre came back a few weeks ago. Ever since it has been there now and again by fits and starts. At the light, at the danger light. What does it seem to do? He repeated, if possible with increased passion and vehemence, what former gesticulation of, for God's sake, clear the way. Then he went on, I have no peace or rest from it. It calls to me for many minutes together in an agonized manner. Below there, look out, look out. It stands waving to me. It rings my little bell. I caught that. Did it ring your bell yesterday evening when I was here and you went to the door? Twice. Why, see, said I, how your imagination misleads you. My eyes were on the bell and my ears were open to the bell. And if I am a living man, it did not ring at those times. No, nor at any other time, except when it was rung in the natural course of physical things by the station communicating with you. He shook his head. I have never made a mistake as to that yet, sir. I have never confused the spectre's ring with the man's. The ghost's ring is a strange vibration in the bell that it derives from nothing else. And I have not asserted that the bell stirs to the eye. I don't wonder that you failed to hear it, but I heard it. And did the spectre seem to be there when you looked out? It was there. Both times. He repeated firmly. Both times. He bit his underlip as though, oh, will you come to the door with me and look for it now? He bit his underlip as though he were somewhat unwilling, but arose. I opened the door and stood on the step while he stood in the doorway. There was the danger light. There was the dismal mouth of the tunnel. There were the high, wet stone walls of the cutting. There were the stars above them. Do you see it? I asked him, taking particular note of his face. His eyes were prominent and strained, but not very much more so. Perhaps that my own had been when I had directed them earnestly towards the same spot. No, he answered, it is not there. Agreed, said I. We went in again, shut the door, and resumed our seats. I was thinking how best to improve this advantage, if it might be called one, when he took up the conversation in such a matter-of-course way, so assuming that there could be no serious question of fact between us, that I felt myself placed in the weakest of positions. By this time you will fully understand, sir, he said, that what troubles me so dreadfully is the question, what does the spectre mean? I was not sure, I told him, that I did fully understand. What is its warning against? He said, ruminating, with his eyes on the fire and only by times turning them on me. What is the danger? Where is the danger? There is danger overhanging somewhere on the line. Some dreadful calamity will happen. It is not to be doubted this third time, after what has gone before. But surely this is a cruel haunting of me. What can I do? He pulled out his handkerchief and wiped the drops from his heated forehead. If I telegraph danger on either side of me or on both, I can give no reason for it, he went on, wiping the palms of his hands. I should get into trouble and do no good. They would think I was mad. This is the way it would work. Message. Danger. Take care. Answer. What danger? Where? Message. Don't know, but for God's sake, take care. They would displace me. What else could they do? His pain of mind was most pitiable to see. It was the mental torture of a conscientious man, oppressed beyond endurance his hands outward across his temples in an extremity of feverish distress. Why not tell me where the accident was to happen, if it must happen? Why not tell me how it could be averted, if it could have been averted? When on its second coming it hit its face, why not tell me instead, she's going to die, let them keep her at home? If it came on those two occasions only to show me that its warnings were true, and so to prepare me for the third, why not warn me plainly now? And I, Lord help me, a mere poor signalman in a solitary station, why not go to somebody with credit to be believed and power to act? When I saw him in this state, I saw that for the poor man's sake, as well as for the public safety, what I had to do for the time was to compose his mind. Therefore, setting aside all question of reality and unreality between us, I represented to him that whoever thoroughly discharged his duty must do well, and that at least it was his comfort that he understood his duty, though he did not understand these confounding appearances. In his effort I succeeded far better than in the attempt to reason him out of his conviction. He became calm. The occupations incidental to his post as the night advanced began to make larger demands on his attention, and I left him at 2 in the morning. I had offered to stay through the night, but he would not hear of it. That I more than once looked back at the red light as I ascended the pathway, that I did not like the red light, and that I should have slept but poorly if my bed had been under it, I see no reason to conceal. Nor did I like the 2 sequences of the accident and the dead girl. I see no reason to conceal that either. But what ran most in my thoughts was the consideration how I ought to act, having become the recipient of this disclosure. I had proven the man to be intelligent, vigilant, painstaking, and exact, but how long might he remain so in his state of mind? Though in a subordinate position, still he held a most important trust, and would I, for instance, like to stake my own life on the chances of his continuing to execute it with precision? Unable to overcome a feeling that there would be something treacherous in my communicating what he had told me to his superiors in the company, without first being plain with himself and proposing a middle course to him, I ultimately resolved to offer to accompany him, otherwise keeping his secret for the present, to the wisest medical practitioner we could hear of in those parts, and to take his opinion. A change in his time of duty would come round next night. He had apprised me, and he would be off an hour or 2 after sunrise, and on again soon after sunset. I had appointed to return accordingly. Next evening was a lovely evening, and I walked out early to enjoy it. The sun was not yet quite down when I traversed the field path near the top of the deep cutting. I would extend my walk for an hour, I said to myself, half an hour on and half an hour back, and it would then be time to go to my signalman's box. Before pursuing my stroll, I stepped to the brink and mechanically looked down from the point from which I had first seen him. I cannot describe the thrill that seized upon me when, close at the mouth of the tunnel, I saw the appearance of a man, with his left sleeve across his eyes, passionately waving his right arm. The nameless horror that oppressed me passed in a moment, for in a moment I saw that this appearance of a man was a man indeed, and that there was a little group of other men, standing at a short distance, to whom he seemed to be rehearsing the gesture he made. The danger light was not yet lighted. Against its shaft a little low hut, entirely new to me, had been made, of some wooden supports and tarpaulin. It looked no bigger than a bed. With an irresistible sense that something was wrong, with a flashing, self-reproachful fear that fatal mischief had come of my leaving the man there and causing no one to be sent to overlook or correct what he did, I descended the notched path with all the speed I could make. "What is the matter?" I asked the man. "Signalman killed this morning, sir." "Not the man belonging to that box?" "Yes, sir." "Not the man I know?" "You would recognize him, sir, if you knew him," said the man who spoke for the others, solemnly uncovering his own head and raising the end of the tarpaulin, for his face is quite composed. "Oh, how did this happen? How did this happen?" I asked, turned from one to another as the hut closed in again. "He was cut down by an engine, sir. No man in England knew his work better. But somehow he was not clear of the outer rail. It was just a broad day. He had struck the light and had the lamp in his hand. As the engine came out of the tunnel, his back was towards her and she cut him down. The man drove her and was showing how it happened. Show the gentleman on. The man who wore a rough, dark dress stepped back to his former place at the mouth of the tunnel. "Coming round the curve in the tunnel, sir," he said. "I saw him at the end, like as if I saw him down a perspective glass." There was no time to check speed, and I knew him to be very careful. As he didn't seem to take heed of the whistle, I shut it off when we were running down upon him and called to him as loud as I could call. "What did you say?" I said. "Below there, look out, for God's sake, clear the way." I started. It was a dreadful time, sir. I never left off calling to him. I put this arm before my eyes not to see, and I waved this arm to the last, but it was no use. Without prolonging the narrative to dwell on any one of its curious circumstances more than on any other, I may, in closing it, point out the coincidence that the warning of the engine driver included not only the words which the unfortunate signalman had repeated to me as haunting him, but also the words which I myself, not he, had attached, and that only in my own mind, to the gesticulation he had imitated. That's kind of creepy, I must admit. Ew. Okay, I cannot feel my leg anymore. Just one sec. Ow. Ow. Okay. Anyways, next one. I think I'm gonna do one more. I just found a short one that I will read. It's called The Ghost by Catherine Wells. Okay. The Ghost. She was a girl of 14 and she sat propped up with pillows in an old four-poster bed, coughing a little with the feverish cold that kept her there. She was tired of reading by lamplight, and she lay and listened to the few sounds that she could hear and looked into the fire. From downstairs, down the wide, rather dark oak-panelled corridor, hung with brown ochre pictures of tremendous naval engagements exploding fierily in their centers, down the broad stone stairs that ended in a heavy creaking nail-studded door, there blew into her remoteness sometimes a gust of dance music. Cousins and cousins and cousins were down there, and Uncle Timothy as host, leading the fun. Several of them had danced into her room during the day and said that her illness was a perfect shame, told her that the skating in the park was too heavenly, and danced out again. Uncle Timothy had been as kind could be, but downstairs all the full cup of happiness the lonely child had looked forward to so eagerly for a month was running away like liquid gold. She watched the flames of the big dark shadows crept down from the ceiling and gathered in the corners against the paneling. She turned from the scrutiny of the room to the bright circle of light under the lamp on the table beside her, and the companionable suggestiveness of the currant, jelly and spoon, grapes and lemonade and little pile of books and kindly fuss that shone warmly and comfortingly there. Perhaps it would not be long before Mrs. Bunting, her uncle's housekeeper, would come in again and sit down and talk to her. Mrs. Bunting, very probably, was more occupied than usual that evening. There were several extra guests. Another house party had motored over for the evening, and they had brought with them a romantic figure, a celebrity, no less a personage than the actor Percival East. The girl had indeed broken down from her fortitude that afternoon when Uncle Timothy had told her of this visitor. Uncle Timothy was surprised. It was only another schoolgirl who would have understood fully what it meant to be denied by a mere cold the chance of meeting face to face that chivalrous hero of drama. Another girl who had glowed at his daring, wept at his noble renunciations, been made happy, albeit enviously and vicariously, by his final embrace with the lady of his love. There, dear child," Uncle Timothy had said, patting her shoulder and greatly distressed. Never mind. If you can't get up, I'll bring him in to see you here. I promise I will. But the pull these chaps have over you little women," he went on, half to himself. The paneling creaked. Of course it always did in these old houses. She was of that order of apprehensive, slightly nervous people who do not believe in ghosts, but all the same hope devoutly they may never see one. Surely it was a long time since anyone had visited her. It would be hours, she supposed, before the girls, who had the room next to her own, into which the communicating door comfortingly led, came up to bed. If she rang, it took only a minute or two before anyone reached her from the remote servants' quarters. There ought soon, she thought, to be a housemaid about the corridor outside, tidying up the bedrooms, putting coal on the fires, and making such like companionable noises. That would be pleasant. How bored one got in bed anyhow, and how dreadful it was. How unbearably dreadful it was that she should be stuck in bed now, missing everything, missing every bit of the glorious glowing time that was slipping away down there. At that she had to begin swallowing her tears again. With a sudden burst of sound, a storm of clapping and laughter, the heavy door at the foot of the big stairs swung open and closed. Footsteps came upstairs, and she heard men's voices approaching. Uncle Timothy. He knocked at the door ajar. "Come in," she cried gladly. With him was a quiet-faced, greyish-haired man of middle age. Then Uncle had sent for the doctor after all. "Here is another of your young worshippers, Mr. East," said Uncle Timothy. Mr. East, she realized in a flash that she had expected him to him purple brocade, powdered hair, and ruffles of fine lace. Her uncle smiled at her disconcerted face. "She doesn't seem to recognize you, Mr. East," said Uncle Timothy. "Of course I do," she declared bravely, and sat up, flushed with excitement and her feverishness, bright-eyed and with ruffled hair. Indeed, she began to see the stage hero she remembered, and the kindly-faced man before her flow together like a composite portrait. There was the little knot of the head, there was the chin, yes, and the eyes. Now she came to look at them. "Why were they all clapping you?" she asked. "Because I had just promised to frighten them out of their wits," replied Mr. East. "Oh, how?" "Mr. East," said Uncle Timothy, "is going to dress up as our long-lost ghost, and give us a really shuddering time of it downstairs." "Are you?" cried the girl with all the fierce desire that only a girl can utter in her voice. "Oh, why am I ill like this, Uncle Timothy? I'm not ill, really. Can't you see I'm better? I've been in bed all day. I'm perfectly well. I shall look rather horrid, I expect. Are you sure you won't mind? Mind when it's you, laughed the girl. He went out of the room, shutting the door. Rum-de-dum, dee-dee, she hummed gaily and wriggled down into her bedclothes again, straightening the sheet over her chest and prepared to wait. She lay quietly for some time, with a smile on her face, thinking of Percival East and fitting his grave, kindly face back into its various dramatic settings. She was quite satisfied with him. She began to go over in her mind in detail the last play in which she had seen him act. How splendid he had looked when he fought the duel. She couldn't imagine him gruesome, she thought. What would he do with himself? Whatever he did, she wasn't going to be frightened. He shouldn't be allowed to boast he had frightened her. Uncle Timothy would be there too, she supposed, would he? Footsteps went past her door outside, along the corridor, and died away. The big door at the end of the stairs opened and changed shut. Uncle Timothy had gone down. She waited on. A log burned through the middle of a ruddy thread, fell suddenly in two tumbling pieces on the hearth. She started at the sound. How quiet everything was. How much longer would he be, she wondered. The fire wanted making up, the pieces of wood collecting together. Should she ring? But he might come in just when the servant was mending the fire, and that would spoil his entry. The fire could wait. The room was very still, and with the fallen fire darker. She heard no more any sound at all from downstairs. That was because the door was shut. All day it had been open, but now the last slender link that held her to downstairs was broken. The lamp flame gave a sudden fitful leap. Why? Was it going out? Was it? No. She hoped he wouldn't jump out at her, but of course he wouldn't. Anyhow, whatever he did, she wouldn't be frightened, really frightened. Forewarned is forearmed. Was that a sound? She started up, her eyes on the door. Nothing. But surely the door had minutely moved. It did not sit back quite so close into its frame. Perhaps it... She was sure it had moved. Yes, it had moved. Opened an inch, and slowly, as she watched, she saw a thread of light grow between the edge of the door and its frame, grow almost imperceptibly wider, and stop. He could never come through that. It must have yawned open in its own accord. Her heart began to beat rather quickly. She could see only the upper part of the door. The foot of her bed hid the lower third. Her attention tightened. Suddenly as a pistol shot, she saw that there was a little figure like a dwarf near the wall, between the door and the fireplace. It was a little cloaked figure, no higher than the table. How did he do it? It was moving slowly, very slowly towards the fire, as if it was quite unconscious of her. It was wrapped about in a cloak that trailed, with a slouched head on its head bent down to its shoulders. She gripped the clothes with her hands. It was so queer, so unexpected. She gave a little gasping laugh to break the tension of the silence, to show she appreciated him. The dwarf stopped dead at the sound and turned its face round to her. Oh, but she was frightened. It was a dead white face, a long pointed face hunched between its shoulders. There was no color in the eyes that stared at her. How did he do it? How did he do it? It was too good. She laughed again nervously, and with a clutch of terror that she could not control, she saw the creature move out of the shadow and come towards her. She braced herself with all her might. She mustn't be frightened by a bit of acting. He was coming nearer. It was horrible, horrible. Right up to her bed. She flung her head beneath the bedclothes. Whether she screamed or not, she never knew. Someone was rapping at the door, speaking cheerily. She took her head out of the clothes with a revulsion of shame at her fright. The horrible little creature was gone. Mr. East was speaking at her door. What was saying, "What?